Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Amita Bhide from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. This is a module on intersecting marginalities as a part of the paper on community organization. What do we mean by intersecting marginalities? When we begin to think of poverty and social exclusion, one of the most important things that we actually encounter is that disadvantage does not come often as a single disadvantage, but that there are groups of disadvantage which are clustered together. Naila Kabir refers to it as bivalence, polyvalence, etc. And therefore, we need to actually understand how do these intersectionalities actually manifest themselves and how do they produce and reproduce the overall concept of exclusion. We are also going to do this with the help of two examples because only then do we appreciate what is the actual significance of this intersectionality. So we are going to deal with one concept of a public good, and secondly we are going to look at the experience of an excluded group, which is going to be the Mushahars of Bihar. Okay, so let me go to the example of a public good. What is a public good? A public good is expected to be that kind of a good which has some merit so that no one is excluded. Okay, usually public goods are considered to be those goods which are provided by the state or by the larger public at large, and this is because the benefits or the externalities of excluding anyone are too large. Okay, and education in modern times has really been regarded as the key opportunity structure for modern societies, and therefore education perhaps rightfully should be regarded as a public good. How do we look at education and what has happened to education? How has policy with respect to education actually evolved? But more importantly, we are going to try to see who and why people get excluded from this access to education itself. In the colonial era, the approach to education was highly elitist. And elitist in the sense that education, the purpose of education was seen really as one way in which to colonize the Indians, and the access to education remained limited with traditional structures in society and because of no further attempts of extension to very few social groups. Now, the directive principles of the Indian Constitution actually talked about education as a public good. And in the recent years, we have actually acknowledged that through the 86th Constitutional Amendment in 2002, and then which was further worked upon through the Right to Education Act in 2009. So what does this act and what does this Right to Education Act actually say? It offers access to free education for all children till roughly the age of till roughly the 7th standard, and that's a constitutional commitment which has been given by the Indian state. Who are the groups? Who are the children who are excluded? One basically sees girls, Dalits, Adivasis, Muslims, and children with disabilities. Different aspects through which people and children get excluded from that. One basically also sees that the form that this takes is that you see a tremendous gender gap in educational achievements as one moves ahead of the education ladder. So from primary to secondary to higher secondary and to graduation, the gender gap actually goes on widening. One sees this in the form of cuts to the overall education budget. One sees this in the form of low enrollment, and one sees this in the form of academic underperformance, with large degrees of people and children who are unable to pass at the secondary level and or who remain stagnated even at a secondary or lower secondary levels. So if you begin to see Adivasi, each of these groups faces and manifests different kinds of issues. So Adivasi students have a lower enrollment. In the case of Muslims, you will see that they have a higher literacy rate than the SC or the ST, but they have very poor improvement on other parameters, like we talked about gender gap, underperformance. If you look at children with disability, they show the highest rate of exclusion. So both with so many, nearly 34% of children with disability being out of school. If you start looking at multiple disabilities, then more than 58% children being out of school. And when it comes to mental disability, about 48% children being out of school. Then you also see other excluded groups of children, such as children in conflict with law, children who have parents who are engaged in stigmatized work, like work in the red light areas, and you also have street children who are actually excluded from education. So what this means is basically that you have a public good, but there are all of these multiple groups of children who are actually not there within the education system at all. If you look at how policy has actually evolved to include all of these children, one basically sees that Indian education policy has lacked equity, has lacked localization, and has lacked participation. Post 2001, there is an addition of invisibilization issues. So what is happening is that there is a quantitative reach out in terms of increase in numbers of schools and educational facilities. Through the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, for example, there is a whole lot of enrollment which is happening. Madrasas have been started for Muslim children. There have been camps which have been started for never enrolled children. But on the other hand, directionless and low quality education is actually translating into low interest and actual dropouts of stakeholders. So one sees huge issues of wastage and stagnation in the entire education system. So what do we take from this in terms of our understanding of poverty and exclusion? Okay, so education is a public good as per the constitution. So there is no barriers to access per se. But on the other hand, what exclusion from school education means is basically it is also talking of a deprivation of a meaningful future for all of these different groups of children that we have seen. What it also means is that when we begin to look at Dalits, okay, there is a huge amount of indignity that they experience in classrooms, and quality and equity in education emerge as very, very big issues. We need to really ask then in this context, when there is the entire emerging reality of private education, about access to quality education, is it accessible to everyone? How does one create adequate support systems so that access to quality education can be enabled for all children? Is the route going to be working for a common schooling system? Is the route going to be by continuing this privatization of education, and that is the route? So then what is our route for creating access per se? Or whether children from excluded groups are going to be condemned to attending low quality educational amenities? Isn't this a reproduction of the caste system in the modern era? And how do we therefore stop the overall decline in public institutions and genuinely make education into a public good? So the discussion on poverty and exclusion actually leads us to thinking about how multiple and intersecting kind of marginalities lead to a public good also being inaccessible to several groups of people, and in some senses even from a future point of view denying a equitable society where everyone has equal kind of opportunities. So this is an entire system which intersects between traditional institutions. You have the state institutions which have been unable to reach out. You have the market which has not been cognizant of its societal role, and it is all of these intersections which are perpetuating and worsening in some ways the marginalities in particular groups. We will now move from here to understanding how these intersections manifest themselves in the case of a group. So we are going to take the examples of Mushahars. Now Mushahars are a Dalit community which is placed at the lowest level of the caste hierarchy in Bihar. Okay. And largely these are people who live on lands which are owned by a Malik and who depend then on common grazing lands or what are called Gair Mazrua lands, and therefore they have no productive assets of their own. Often the Mushahars are indebted to the Maliks, and which means that they are bound to them in multiple ways. Land reforms have come and gone, they have not benefited the Mushahars. In one study which was done by ActionAid of the Mushahars in Dumri village in Bihar, 80% of the Mushahars had no land. 13.5% of them were marginal landowners. They lived in thatched huts and they lacked any livestock, and most of their children were educated till only the class 3 or 4. There is another study which was done by the Mahadalit Ayog of the Bihar state, and which finds that 92% of the Mushahars were actually engaged only in agricultural labor, and the next option of livelihood for them was migration. So what this means is basically that lacking any kind of productive assets, the kind of outcomes of life that they exhibit are extremely poor. So their life is characterized by extreme poverty, constant food insecurity, chronic undernutrition, and therefore elevated levels of morbidity and low lifespan. With these kind of realities, I think one needs to think about that they are living in parts which are not necessarily that underdeveloped. So basically, the overall development, the pattern in which it occurs is that the fruits of development are actually appropriated by a local elite, and then there are certain groups who are completely denied these benefits. There does not seem to be a political will to change these kind of iniquitous orders. We also see that if one has to genuinely reach out to the Mushahars, it is characterized by bureaucratic incapacity, there is an inadequacy of resources, service delivery is poor, and development programs are poorly implemented. So all of these factors will basically exacerbate the kind of social exclusion that the Mushahars already face. We have looked at the experience of education, we have looked at the experience of the Mushahars, and we understand that marginalities intersect. Okay? We now need to think about what is the implications, or what are the implications of this experience of intersectionality for action, for policy, even conceptually in terms of thinking about poverty and deprivation, and we'll try to do and understand this implications. I'll first go to basically what Ashwini Deshpande, an economist, proposes. And Ashwini Deshpande points out that the entire experience of intersectionality basically says and asserts that you cannot think of poverty as only a in and out experience. That at some point in time you are poor within the poverty line, and at another point in time you are out of the poverty line. This is something which is a very, very commonly applied thinking within policy circles. But what intersectionality means is that there is the entire aspect of multiple things by means, and which basically says that you, income wise you may be out of poverty, but the rest of your intersections still are trying to pull you in. So you cannot have this kind of, and there may be multiple ways therefore that you may keep on being in and out of poverty for a very, very long period of time, and therefore one needs to think very strongly about the implication of intersectionality and the duration of programming itself. Okay. The second thing which is very, very critical here is basically to think about adverse inclusion. And what do we mean by adverse inclusion? That to be excluded out of certain schemes, out of certain public institutions is one thing, but sometimes there may be inclusion on adverse terms. For example, you are a part of a overall health benefit scheme, but on the other hand, the terms on which you are being included, there are too many transactional costs that you are actually paying, and your other multiple marginalities actually ensure that it takes a lot of toll on you. So one needs to think through this adverse inclusion, and how does one prevent those cases of adverse inclusion? For this, institutions need to be sensitive, and we also need to be thinking about how and in what contexts are institutions implementing their programs. I'll bring in a third experience or dimension of intersectionality, and that is something that we draw from Crenshaw's experience. Now, Crenshaw talks about the entire experience and feelings that women of color experience. There are so many overlapping experiences that they have. A, they are black. B, they are women. 3, they are living in particular kinds of neighborhoods. And 4, that they are subjected to violence. Now, all of these experiences literally add to the entire intensity of the experience and make it that much more difficult for women to find access and to get out of any of these situations, whether it is the experience of violence, whether it is the experience of getting included and moving to more inclusive and more positive neighborhoods, or whether it is the entire term and experience of being and finding other alternatives which can make you access the rest of the opportunities that society has to offer. Perhaps adding more poignancy to this experiences of intersectionality is Hannah Arendt's experience, where she talks about being a Jew. A Jew in a particular village, and who was always a perpetual outsider. So she uses this quote of Kafka, and which is a very, very poignant quote. So what does she say? You're not of the village. You're not of the castle meaning the more elite group, but neither are you of the commoners. So you're not belonging to the commoners, you're not belonging to the castle. This is in the older European context. You are nothing at all. And it is this sentence which is like, you are just nobody there. You are there, but you are not there. And it is all this experience of always being outside, that being there but never being able to access what it takes to access the public goods, which are right there in the midst of you. It is not as if there is a physical distance necessarily. And considering one's always the outsider, perhaps is what sums up the experience of exclusion. And I think it is this experience of intersectionality, therefore, we need to now consider all of these implications of the experience to think about what does this mean for policy and for social action. They themselves are trapped. They are trapped in a struggle of survival, so that any attempt on their part to come out only requires two things. It either requires education or it requires capability investment, enhancement through skills or through identification of any alternative productive production assets and so on and so forth. For this, any attempt on their part is going to involve a huge transaction cost. So sending a child to school means that they have to kind of forego that child from being involved in labor and so on and so forth. So when one begins to think of mushahars, we need to begin to think of all of these transaction costs which are caused by the intersecting marginalities themselves. In both these cases of the mushahars and looking at education as a public good, what we have seen is basically that we looked at social exclusion in two forms. Social exclusion refers to particular groups. Social exclusion also refers to institutions and the way they reproduce it. And in both of these instances, we see how things play out in relation to each other and in intersection with each other. And therefore, I think we need to look at what does intersection actually mean. One of the most classical studies and experiences of exclusion is documented by Hannah Crenshaw in her book, where she talks about how women of color feel extremely locked in. So they have so many overlapping experiences of being black, of being woman, of being subjected to particular violence by the men in their surroundings and in their life, and of living in particular neighborhoods. So what it means is that you are always outside. You are never able to access what it takes to access public goods. Public goods are available. It's not as if they are not there, but you don't have it, what it means to actually reach there. So one is constantly the outsider. That's what Hannah Crenshaw's book reads. It is called The Outsider. And then you consider yourself responsible for the outcome, which is the exclusion. So what is happening is exclusion becomes then a composite set of so many marginalities that actually intersect with each other. There are overlapping. How does one deal with this? It is necessary to have an intersectoral approach. One needs to also think about the fact that often this kind of overlap also has spatial dimensions, which means how Hannah Crenshaw talks about living in a particular neighborhood comes with this. So there is a package really of multiple deprivations that comes along, and we need to recognize that as well in order to deal with these kind of intersections. But can we have a generalized policy around intersecting marginalities? We cannot, because intersecting marginalities are highly contextual. They are highly empirical. For example, the mushahars issue is very specific to certain parts of Bihar. On the other hand, one will face other kinds of issue in, let's say, look at Orissa. And in Odisha, we will see that there is a whole lot of focus of development on tribal districts and tribal groups. But on the other hand, institutions and politics are so weak that instead they are dominated by all the coastal groups, and the tribal voice within all of this is weak. So therefore, participation and voice are extremely necessary to counter the impact of intersecting marginalities. The question is, how does one begin to incite participation, elicit voice? Okay? Can policies do this? Policy instruments in India are very, very homogenizing. They are highly centralized and they fail to recognize differential exclusions and deprivations. They only know the lens of targeting things. So this really is the question that we need to focus on. How does one counter this? I think another dimension is you need visibilization. Can we first recognize what kind of intersections are happening? What are those local contexts? And for this, visibilization through data and measures which are context specific are very, very necessary. We need to also understand that processes that produce exclusion in all of these examples are very different kind of processes. So in the case of Mushahars, it is the caste system. In the case of Muslims, it is religion. In other cases, it may be gender. So the way, and these processes are different. And very clearly, therefore, we need localized analysis of poverty and social exclusion. We need to understand and appreciate the local forms of poverty and exclusion, their historicity, what are their contemporary expression, and it is in this context that perhaps community practice has a lot of valuable role to play, because community practice can identify new tools, new resources through which these groups can articulate their own concerns. They can mobilize themselves and demand a due place and space in society, which is today offering so many opportunities. So what one should say, I think education and looking at Mushahars are only two case examples. There are many more cases of intersecting and multiple disadvantage and discrimination in India. We need to also recognize that a lot of significant public good remains out of reach of certain groups and areas, and together this comprises a significant proportion of India's population. So there are several intersecting marginalities, but all of these, and very significant proportions of that, but they are all existing in different parts with highly localized context. We need to also see very clearly how weak voice and non-articulation of agency are intertwined in these deprivations and exclusions. Okay? So finally, how do we look at community practice in identifying these intersections, in prioritizing these groups in interventions, and more crucially, trying to identify both the discriminatory processes which are producing these exclusions, and then realizing actually that public goods actually emerge as public goods. For references, I think Hannah Arendt's book is The Outsider is a fantastic book which gives you an insight into the experience of intersecting marginality. But at the same time, you have a very beautiful report on social exclusion in India, and you can refer to the text then for further references. Thank you.